Alright, well, instead of just tooting my own horn, I just wanted to try to make a video that's off the cuff but gets to the point, pretty straight to the fucking point. Okay, so here we go. Even though I just wasted 10 seconds saying that. Okay, here's the thing. Math and everything, I've begun studying Algebra 2. See, the thing is that I feel... So, does anybody have any scientific papers that they could cite studying how effective, it was for somebody to be trying to learn math in a college math course? Because I've come to the point of view at this point that, I have evidence now that shows that Khan Academy is an effective way to study, and it's up there on the Khan Academy platform, right? This is a good way to learn algebra and everything. That's evaluations have been done about the efficacy of the platform and everything at teaching people mathematics. The whole problem that I have, right? My GED, you've seen it probably. I've probably shown it on here before. I got the 95th percentile in the sciences. So, of course, I'm wondering, has anybody tried to do a study on how effective trying to learn math in a classroom happens to be as compared to using an online platform, for instance? And I gotta say, there's a lot of shit that I feel now that makes me feel I'm probably gonna have the advantage doing things the way that I'm doing it rather than the highly pressurized way that other people are doing it. Because for one thing, I can pause Salman's videos, I can go back over them and everything. And for another thing, I have another advantage in that I know where the testing center happens to be to take the CLEP exams to get out of this hellhole of high pressure, where I've paid a lot of money to be there. I've been there the whole year, and if I don't pass, I'm out a lot of money and time and effort, and I'm gonna have to start over and do it all over again to get this success. And the thing is that mathematics is a difficult subject. It's one of the most difficult subjects to master, right? And I hope that I've still got your attention. It's one of the hardest to do that you can be studying. And the thing is that I now have results, and I've seen up close, I've seen how it is in a college classroom. I've been in there, and I can tell you at the introductory level, everybody else had their hand up. Everybody else was looking for help. Everybody was struggling in that college classroom, which was in context at Portland Community College, right? They're all having issues with it. They're all struggling, and they've all begun that, process of learning and everything. And, so I start asking this question myself, and everything, and I start looking at Google and trying to see what the research is showing. And I found one particularly chilling study that suggested that, that colleges fail about 50% of the people that go in for math and everything. That just right out the gate, they just, like I did, I managed to fail at that point. And, the thing is, stats like that are supposed to make the system appear rigorous. It's supposed to make people think everything's fair and everything, and that they're kicking all these people out because they're not good enough, and that's supposed to improve their appearance in the culture. And they do this on purpose in a lot of ways in the colleges. They make things as exclusionary as possible in order to basically maintain the image of integrity in the culture. It's all politics. It's all bullshit. Really, at the end of the day, it's people are playing games, professionalized games. At that point, if those statistics were to go up and people came in and you were getting 90% results, other institutions might begin to, think they're not as effective as they actually are. Or they might begin to think that the school is just a bad way, or that they're too inclusive and that they have lowered standards and rigor, and questions would start to rise up about how rigorous the platform was, and you'd get evaluations and everything, and there'd be all these problems because they didn't fail 50% of their students. I mean, and it's so clean too, it's such a clean round number that it doesn't seem natural. How nature doesn't produce results like that naturally. You don't get 50% failure rates, on a natural level, unless somebody is just arbitrarily deciding that like half the class is going to fail, no matter what, on purpose and everything. And so, and you hear people complain bitterly, like professors, that these kids come without being prepared for these skills at all. But my frustration is just that I have come to the conclusion from being in one of those rooms and seeing, every student seeking help and nobody being able to ask the questions that they need, and being in the tutoring department over there at PCC and going in for tutoring, that like, and actually trying to apply myself as a student, that this is really just not an effective way, of trying to study math. So here's the thing. I mean, is it not the case that math often makes you reconsider your approach? That if you're good at this, you're going to try to come at it from a different angle, is what they tell you. Come at it from a different perspective and everything. Try, if at first you try and you don't succeed, go at it from a different point of view, do something different than what you were doing and everything, and reapproach this whole thing. Well, I've come to what I have seen at this point is classrooms that are swamped, professors that are not really institutionally able to offer as much support as a student would need. That PCC did its best to try to support me. It offered quite a bit of support for struggling students and everything, but it just wasn't enough to bridge the gap in understanding for me for that course and everything. And that being the case and everything, it wasn't. I guess the take home was supposed to be something like, maybe I'm not good enough for this, but really what I've come to the conclusion is of that I'm not yet good enough for this, and so I started studying to bypass having to do this in a classroom environment with Khan Academy, to teach me this stuff. And maybe I should sign back up for Brilliant, to do this. But anyways, so this was the whole thing. I mean, it was the whole area of like frustration that I was encountering when it came to studying, is just that these classrooms were huge. If you made an error, it turned into something that had real consequences for you and your potential earnings. It turned into a hill that was much harder to climb back out of if you fell into that hole. It put on maximum pressure on us in that sort of academic environment. And, for somebody that's just trying to gain mastery over a subject and, get good at it, and get good at doing these problems and equations and just practice, it doesn't really seem like it's a great approach, I guess, to go into a very pressurized environment where everybody's trying, to get help. Everybody's struggling against a current that's working against them, especially when statistics are showing, 50% of them will end up dropping out or failing anyways inside the system. And plus, like I said, that doesn't look like a good natural number. It doesn't look like what nature would produce naturally. It looks like somebody's manipulating the stats in that regard. And that's what I'm seeing, at this point, and feeling about the whole ordeal that I went through doing this. And it echoes back to my math classes back when I was in high school. I would come in, pretty early in the day, and half the kids would have their heads down, still asleep. And, it would be one teacher, and despite the fact that some of them were asleep, between everybody else that needed help, I would have to hold my hand up, and I'd be there, I'd be there with my hand up, holding my hand up in the air, asking for help with a problem that I was having trouble with, and I'd be holding it up, and what I'd be doing, I'd be holding it up, and I'd be holding it up for the whole class. And, by the time she came around, it was like I could only ask one question, she'd answer it quickly, and then it would almost immediately be another one, and I'd have my hand up, and it would have to be another 50 minutes. By the time they had any help, it was already too late, Class was over entirely, just dumped at that point, and that was kind of my experience of trying to, actually study it in a classroom. It's the same in high school. It's the same up at college. It's like, when is this shit gonna change? If I need assistance, when am I actually gonna get the assistance I need to study this stuff? And so I thought about that, and I thought, in respect to math, not really so much about math itself, but about strategy. You know, I thought about it and how math kind of trains you to think about things like that too. You think about how there may be a different way of solving this particular problem. Maybe you look at it from a different angle and all this other stuff, and it trains you to do this sort of thing. And so I was thinking to myself, and I'm watching all this, and I'm like, wouldn't shouldn't I reconsider my approach, basically? Because my approach has been to try to treble that system into giving me the assistance that I need. And to me, I haven't really seen a lot of firsthand powerful evidence that what they do in those classrooms is very effective at teaching people mathematics. But one thing I do know, and that gives me a great advantage, is that I know that Khan Academy has studies out showing that it works and is effective. And if you want them, all you have to do is look at, put your question into Google, Khan Academy effectiveness, basically, how effective is it and everything. And they've got research papers that showing that this is improving students' test scores and everything, and that it's helping them do better on test and everything when they do it, and when they put in the effort to work at Khan Academy and work on problems at Khan Academy. So it was this that drove me out of the halls of academia and into the internet and to these platforms, because to try to learn it, on my own terms and everything, as opposed to learning at the pace and terms of an academic institution. And I think I have a lot of advantages to doing it this way. I mean, I can pause the video, I can rewind the video, I can go back over it, I can I've got that kind of flexibility to do that. I don't have to move at the calendar speed. If I get stuck on something, I can afford to spend some extra time on the problem and everything. I'm not in a situation where I'm under a lot of stress because there's a test that's coming up and that's going to affect my GPA and thus my future and everything. And all of this is, going through my head. And, I'm wondering if there are any professional mathematicians who agree with me on this one. Are there any, what would the experts say about this? If you're like a PhD mathematician, what do you think about it? What are your thoughts? Because I'm just starting down the path of algebra. It seems to me that this is just not like, if I want to succeed at studying mathematics, it doesn't seem like it's a great approach to try to be learning it in a classroom. That's my takeaway from all that I've observed. I've found out that from experience, I was learning a lot more using Khan Academy as a platform than I was learning in a classroom, for the simple fact that the classrooms are swamped. Everybody needs help. Everybody's having trouble. You're in a system of people that are drowning, like they're just drowning at the subject. They're underwater with you. I mean, the only good thing about it is that you're all drowning at the same time.